Israel-Gaza-Iran war news. What if U.S.-Israel aid cut? Ending funding would reduce Washington's Middle East influence. That's why it's worth doing. On March 14, 2024, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat New York, who 13 months earlier had vowed at Jerusalem's Yad Vashem World Holocaust Remembrance Center that as long as Hashem breathes air into my lungs, the United States Senate will stand behind Israel with our fullest support, stared solemnly into the Senate's C-SPAN cameras and told Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to leave. The Netanyahu coalition no longer meets the demands of Israel after October 7, Schumer said, referring to the Hamas killing and mass kidnapping across the military border between the Gaza Strip and Israel. At this critical time, a new election is necessary for a healthy and open decision-making process about Israel's future. If Netanyahu wins enough votes to form a new government, the war will continue. The highest-ranking Jewish elected official in U.S. history said, then the United States will have no choice but to assume a more active role in molding Israeli policy by utilizing our leverage to change the present direction. American critics of Israeli policy, including many who are wary of Washington's influence on world affairs, increasingly say the $3.8 billion provided annually should directly influence Israeli behavior on war, humanitarian aid to Gaza, settlements in the West Bank, and even proposed judiciary reforms, or be withdrawn. Last November, Senator Bernie Sanders, Independent Vermont, reiterated a criticism he and other 2020 Democratic presidential candidates made: the Netanyahu government, or hopefully a new Israeli government, must understand that not one penny will be coming to Israel from the U.S. unless there is a fundamental change in their military and political positions. This spring, President Joe Biden, a staunch defender of Israel for 50 years, appeared to be shifting toward Sanders' views. Politico reported, citing for U.S. sources with knowledge of internal administration thinking, that Biden would propose restricting military aid to Israel if the country follows forward with a large-scale invasion of Rafah, 3 days before Schumer's well-telegraphed speech. The Rafah offensive was halted days later. After the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, destroyed a World Central Kitchen aid convoy in Gaza on April 1, killing 7, Biden told Netanyahu in a tense phone call that Israel needed to announce and implement a series of specific, concrete, and measurable steps to address civilian harm, humanitarian suffering, and the safety of aid workers, or the U.S. would halt military operations. Nancy Pelosi, Democrat California, and 36 other congressional members wrote to the president on April 5 urging him to reconsider your recent decision to authorize the transfer of a new arms package to Israel, and to withhold this and any future offensive arms transfers until a full investigation into the airstrike. NBC called this a turning point in U.S.-Israeli relations. But that turn lasted 10 days or less. Iran launched more than 300 potentially lethal missiles and drones into Israel on April 14, marking the first time the Islamic Republic had directly attacked Israel after decades of supporting Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, and various armed factions in Syria and Iraq. The U.S. and Israel's technology and regional military arrangements intercepted most of the non-missing rockets. The House must pass urgent national security legislation for Israel and urgent humanitarian aid for Palestinians in Gaza, Biden stated in the Wall Street Journal, supporting a $26.38 billion Israeli package. I've expressed worries about civilian safety in Gaza during the fight with Hamas, but this aid focuses on Israel's long-term defense against Iran and other threats. After months of delay, embattled House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican Louisiana, unveiled the aid bill that day. The controversial UNRWA operation in Gaza was subject to the single restriction. A turning point? Nah. America has to talk about leverage as it faces another tragic and apparently interminable Middle East crisis. An honest assessment of Washington's regional and global carrots and sticks system at a time when American imperial ambitions are declining may uncover painful but potentially game-changing insights. Many pro-Israelis prefer Bernie Sanders' policy outcome for the opposite reasons: end it, don't mend it. 3 months before the October 7 massacre, Tablet published a controversial essay by Jacob Siegel and Leo Leibovitz titled "End U.S. Aid to Israel." Despite receiving roughly $4 billion annually from Washington, Israel sacrifices more value due to the majority of military aid going directly to U.S. weapons manufacturers, according to the brief. In return, American reimbursements impair Israel's local defense sector, economy, and autonomy, giving Washington veto power over Israeli weapons sales and diplomatic and military strategy. After the Hamas conflict, Israel critics will shudder at the idea that Washington has veto power over Tel Aviv. Despite this conflict, America has coordinated and advised on policy more closely with Israel than with NATO partner Turkey in its ongoing fights with Syrian Kurds. During a period when America's Israeli aid has lost purchasing power. The Israel of 2023, Siegel and Leibovitz wrote, is enormously wealthier and more powerful than the dusty socialist country of 40 years ago, where local electrical systems could be overloaded by American hairdryers. Wow! Israel's GDP per capita is higher than Japan and Italy's and approaching France and the UK. In 1981, the United States provided Israel with $4.5 billion in economic and military help at a time when the entire GDP of the Jewish state was only $25.4 billion. Now, GDP is over $500 billion. United States funding has dropped from 17.7% of the Israeli economy to 0.7%, and even with the massive financial inflow, it rises to 5.7% this fiscal year. When selling the supplemental, Biden noted that the strings attached include sending military equipment from our own stockpiles and using Congress-authorized funds to replenish them, benefiting both our friends and ourselves. Therefore, America is sending money that Israel no longer needs to secure long-term contracts with the military-industrial complex. President Barack Obama's 2018 10-year, $38 billion Memorandum of Understanding permitted Israel to spend 25% of the annual total on domestic defense manufacture until this year, when it will drop to zero. This strong military alliance, which began shortly after the 1967 Six-Day War, has benefited Washington and Jerusalem. Israel receives the Iron Dome and David's Sling missile interception systems, while the U.S. receives top intelligence in a volatile region and a privileged seat at the table for peace negotiations based on trade. These contracts might be freely entered into without U.S. taxpayer money, as Sanders and anti-interventionist Republicans like Senator Mike Lee, Republican Utah, prefer. What would become of American influence? Weaning Israel off of American assistance would have the added advantage of removing the issue of conditioning such aid or using it as leverage, which sometimes surface when the U.S. and Israel disagree on important policy issues, such as the peace process. Former Israeli Justice Minister Yossi Beilin and former U.S. Ambassador to Israel and Egypt Daniel Kurtzer wrote in the National Interest for years. In other words, abandon Schumer and Biden's two-state solution, which Israel has rejected since October 7. Do not be shocked if the country's regional qualitative military edge, established in U.S. law, is used more freely to proactively strike Iran's offensive capabilities, including as missile production, nuclear development, and senior-level military planning. Would reducing Israel aid increase war? Predicting the Middle East is futile. However, remembering that Israel is not the only country on the Arabian Peninsula to receive billions in American military aid can help scenario planners move faster toward a world where foreign policy commitments match domestic public opinion. Leverage purchased. Even if the U.S. shut off all help tomorrow and the American-Israel Public Affairs Committee, the Israel lobby, closed, the two countries' love would remain strong. Israel has been among the most favored nations by Americans for 25 years, according to Gallup. 85% of the world's Jews live in the U.S. or Israel, nearly equally. Hamas killed at least 33 of Israel's 200,000 dual citizens on October 7, and 5 more were kept prisoner as of May 1. Even while Americans, particularly Democrats and the young, have soured on Israel's conflict, the countries share a liberal democratic and capitalistic culture and decades of human interaction.